All right, good morning and good afternoon, everyone. My name's Anthony Priori. I'm the digital marketing specialist at TPGi. We'll wait just a few minutes as people sign in and we'll get started briefly. While we wait, though, if anyone wants to share where they're calling in from in our chat, please feel free to do that and we can see where everyone's hopping on from. We have a couple people hopping on from everywhere. I still see a few trickling in, though, so we're just going to give it one more minute and we'll start momentarily. Okay, thank you everyone for joining us today for our webinar, Case Study, Creating Accessible Cultural Experiences with TPGi's David Swallow, Principal UX Consultant. and Bloomberg's Wanami Spencer, Senior User Experience Designer. Before we get started, I have a few housekeeping items I'd like to get to. So firstly, this session is being recorded, and we will email everyone the recording after the event. Secondly, we have captions available, so feel free to turn those on and use them as needed. Next, we will have time for a live Q&A later in the webinar, so please use the Q&A box, and we'll answer as many of those questions as we can at the end of the presentation. I encourage using the Q&A box because sometimes they can get lost in chat and we may not see them, so if possible, when you're writing your questions, use the Q&A box. And then lastly, if anyone needs any accessibility support, training, or usability testing, we will send out an email with a link to schedule a time to speak with one of our experts. So with that, I will let David and Wanami get started and provide an introduction for themselves.
Okay, thanks, Anthony. Welcome, everybody. Today, we're going to be speaking about accessibility in the cultural arts space. And specifically, we're going to be looking at the integration of accessibility into the design and development of a free mobile app called Bloomberg Connects, which features digital guides to cultural institutions around the world. TPGi partnered with Bloomberg Philanthropies to improve accessibility features of the app, which now provides a means for people with disabilities to engage with cultural institutions and experience their content in an accessible and inclusive way. So today's presentation will cover how key accessibility barriers were identified and addressed, reflect on how the results of usability testing with people with disabilities helped verify the quality of the app's user experience. So just to introduce ourselves, I'm David Swallow. I'm Principal UX Consultant at TPGi. I'm responsible for various UX services here at TPGi, including design reviews, user research, and usability testing. And with me today is...
Hey everyone, my name is Wanami Spencer. As Anthony mentioned, I'm a senior interaction designer and the accessibility lead for the Bloomberg Connects app. And I'm reporting today from New York City, so apologies in advance if any of our famous traffic comes in over the... And we can go to the next slide, please. So just for some quick background, historically, museums and other cultural organizations have presented accessibility issues for people with disabilities. And just as one example, informational placards that are typically displayed next to an artwork are difficult to read or even impossible for people with visual impairments. But there are many other issues that people encounter. And also more and more cultural organizations are incorporating digital technologies into their offerings to try and engage with their audiences wherever they are and to enhance the video or the visitor experience. And so it's vital that these experiences are accessible to people with disabilities as well. Next slide. Enter Bloomberg Connects, which is a free mobile app featuring digital guides to museums, galleries, sculpture parks, gardens, and other cultural spaces. It was launched in 2018 on iOS and Android, and to date it has over 2 million downloads and over 250 partnering organizations located around the world. And the digital guides within the app provide a multimedia experience that can be used in tandem with an on-site visit or from anywhere. This mobile experience is powered by a proprietary content management system, which is used by partnering organizations to create their guides on the platform. And to start, I'm going to talk a little bit about our design journey. Next slide. So the accessibility of the app was a priority from the very beginning, and starting as early as So in addition to our primary goal of ensuring the app wanted to publish a voluntary product accessibility template, also known as a VPAT, which is a public-facing report attesting to how we meet accessibility standards. In Q1 of 2020, we engaged TPGi to help us assess. So first, they performed a manual audit of all of the key screens and user workflows for both iOS and Android against the WCAG 2.1 AA standards and also across a range of assistive technologies. And the output of that was a report detailing all of the places where we passed or failed various compliance criteria and at what level. Though we did pass in many areas, there were still many things that we needed to fix, enhance, or rebuild altogether, to the tune of over 200 unique issues. Next slide. So we had our work cut out for us, but before we could get started, we needed to define a process for design and engineering and TPGi to collaborate in a systematic and organized manner. This was an important step, so we took the time to really plan out the approach before we started any work. And the process that ended up working the best for us was a multi-step process that included first making sure that we understood the guidelines and the recommendations that rolled up into them. We would take that understanding and use it to brainstorm a range of solutions. We could take those solutions back to TPGi to confirm which one was going to address the issue in the best and most scalable way. And then after implementation, of course, we needed to validate that the app was functioning the way that it was supposed to. And we worked together in an agile fashion, so we made sure to plan for this multi-step cycle in all of our estimates and timelines. And the next slide, please. So from a design perspective, some of the challenges we encountered included differences between interaction conventions on iOS versus Android that required us to either come up with custom solutions for both platforms or define one unified solution that would scale across both. Unfortunately, there weren't a lot of real-world examples of best-in-class accessible mobile experiences for some of the features that we were trying to design for. So we needed to come up kind of with our own solution for those. Support for orientation in portrait and landscape required responsive redesign of some of the screens and new layouts. We also found that the guidelines were fairly web-centric. So some mobile patterns weren't explicitly covered, and we needed to kind of dig into the guidelines and really try and extend them to the mobile patterns to understand how they could be addressed. And then we viewed these challenges as opportunities to improve the experience overall. On the right-hand side of the slide is an example of a list view map, which the app defaults to when a screen reader is detected, but is also available to non-screen reader users who just might find a linear presentation better suited to their needs. And next slide, please. On the engineering side, we also encountered a number of challenges due to the fact that our app is built using the React Native framework instead of separate native solutions for iOS and Android. Many common mobile interaction patterns, such as screen reader focus order, external keyboard navigation, modals and overlays, and embedded rich text links, the maps that I just mentioned, and of course carousels, required us to come up with creative solutions to work around, the limitations implicit in React Native. Carousels, it may come as no surprise to many people, proved a particular challenge for both screen reader and keyboard navigation. So one change we made to improve the experience was to move away from using a visual peek ahead, which is being shown on the left side of the slide of the next card, in order to support a more seamless navigation. On the right side of the slide, we are showing the carousel with the peek ahead removed, which was a better solution to support the navigation challenges that we encountered. Next slide. So challenges notwithstanding, we did make significant improvements to the app's accessibility features and compatibility with accessible technology. And we're happy to say that today the app has support for navigation of the app via a screen reader or keyboard or another external device, such as a switch device. We have smart defaults, for example, to the textual version of the map when a screen reader is detected for some screens and flows. We support text scaling to maximum legible sizes on every screen, and every screen in the app is usable in either portrait or landscape orientation. And every screen in the app also meets contrast requirements for text and graphical elements, and we've tried to ensure that color is never used as a sole indicator of information. And we've integrated with many of the built-in device accessibility settings, such as zoom and color inversion. And all of these enhancements just work without requiring any additional effort from our cultural partners. So that means they're able to provide these features out of the box to users of their digital guides. Next slide. But our platform is a bit unique in that, as I mentioned, the actual content within the digital guides is created by the cultural partners using the content management system. So we needed to make sure that that system supported creating accessible content, including the ability to add alt text and captions to images, the ability to add text transcripts for audio content, and for video content, the ability to support subtitles or captions, as well as to add in textual transcripts for video content within a guide. And we needed to support the ability to edit text to support accessible formatting of things like links or large blocks of text, which might be just hard to read and needed to be broken up into separate consumable chunks. And on the right is an example from our image creation screen in the CMS, which you can see the fields for adding alt text and captions, but also a hoverable informational tooltip whereby users can get contextual help on what alt text is, as well as do and don'ts. So we wanted to make sure that we integrated accessibility information throughout the CMS so users could get on-demand help and information when they needed it. And a common issue for many museums, and especially as many are still recovering from the repercussions of the global pandemic, is finding the resources to do all their great work. Bloomberg is committed to support in this area as well. And as one example, we've partnered with a company called Rev to provide free transcription services for captions and transcripts, as well as the translation of that content into multiple languages. And next. We've also included internal guidelines into our CMS Help Center that is hosted online to promote a shared understanding of accessibility requirements and also how to best leverage the platform's accessibility capabilities. It's a living resource that's available to all of our cultural partners, and we're evolving it as we add new features and resources to the platform. And finally, we wanted to ensure that we continue to prioritize accessibility throughout the design lifecycle. One way that we do this is by including accessibility specifications in our design deliverables. As the primary audience of these deliverables, we worked with our engineers to define the most clear and consistent way to define these specs. So for example, our interaction deliverables, we make sure that they specify the screen reader and keyboard behaviors, including focus order and the announcement of accessible names, roles, and hints. And our visual design deliverables always account for contrast and scalability considerations. And to keep designers on track, we also have designing for accessibility checklists and a designer-focused library of accessibility patterns and considerations. So we learned some lessons along the way, including to incorporate accessibility into the very first discussion as requirements. We've also learned that building accessibility into our UI elements at the component level means that we can reuse them and just make sure that the accessibility features are propagated everywhere that that component is used, which is really helpful and efficient. And we've learned to exercise a little caution when following trends. So many mobile design trends and patterns that have become popular over the years just may not be the best choice for an accessible experience because they're not very compatible with assistive technology and/or they just go against accessibility best practices. Some examples of that are things such as a super minimal UI or user interface that prioritizes kind of slick, understated aesthetics over really strong contrast, super clear navigation, and explicit labeling. Things like translucent overlays, which look really nice, but often prove problematic for navigating with assistive technology and also may be confusing for some users. And as well, over-reliance on sort of screen real estate saving features that are commonly used in smaller screens like floating elements or layering or disappearing controls and buttons. Those can be not only complex to understand, but also just challenging to design a predictable focus order around. So we try and avoid those things. And last but not least, though it's always a UX mantra, this journey was a great reminder that the proof of the pudding is in the eating, and that compliance doesn't automatically yield a good user experience. And it's really, really important to test with users. And with that, I'll turn it over now to David to discuss our user testing.
Okay, thanks, Wanami. So yeah, we pick up the story in June last year, where following on from the manual accessibility audit and remediation cycle, TPGi conducted a usability study of the Bloomberg Connects app with people with disabilities. So the purpose of this study was to gain insight into the extent and nature of difficulties that people with disabilities might encounter in using the app. Although originally a real-life in situ usability evaluation had been planned, the COVID pandemic put paid to that. So instead, the study was conducted remotely using the Zoom platform that we're on today. So we conducted the study with 15 participants, 8 who were blind or had low vision, 4 who were deaf or hard of hearing, and 3 who had motor impairment with limited manual dexterity. And while this is in no way a complete set of disability groups, it does provide a good cross-section of profiles of user groups that benefit from accessible design. Participants represented a range of ages from 25 to 34 through to over 60. The majority of participants were based in the US, but 4 participants were based in the UK. And each participant tested on their own mobile device, either iPhone or Android, used their own assistive technology and settings. And all participants had prior experience of using mobile devices and apps, and some considered themselves an expert. So participants downloaded the live public version of Bloomberg Connects from the iOS or Android App Store. And the specific content being evaluated was a purposely created guide for the fictional Bloomberg Collection art gallery, based loosely on the Bloomberg Philanthropies building in New York. And the guide included a range of content and media to allow the different app features to be tested. And participants completed a representative series of tasks using this guide. So the plausibility of the guide and its contents lent a degree of realism and ecological validity to the testing, which really helps. So participants were positive and enthusiastic towards the Bloomberg Connects app. So on some tasks, participants required a bit of prompting to fully complete the task, but overall participants from across the different disability groups completed the tasks with ease. And this was reflected in the perceived difficulty ratings for each task, which suggested participants found none of the tasks very challenging. Participants also rated Bloomberg Connects highly across various attributes such as ease of use, clarity, and discoverability. And in addition to this, the overall system usability scale score, which is a well-established benchmarking metric for usability, was 84. And this corresponds to an A grade and an adjective rating of excellent. So moving on to the more qualitative findings, participants specifically praised the structure and organization of the Bloomberg Connects app, finding it very easy to navigate. Participants liked the tabs, making it easy to jump to different parts of the app. And some felt the structure of the app makes it very clear what's available in a particular guide. The app's map interface, which guides users around institutions and exhibitions, was well received by users. Bloomberg developed an accessible list-based alternative to the more visual map, which users found very easy to use. And indeed, one blind screen reader user was particularly impressed with the map interface, noting that it's something that many other apps failed to make accessible. And we've got a short clip of that participant describing their experience.
Well, actually, I was pleasantly surprised because typically when I look at apps and they say map, it's a
Mhm.
physical map that I typically can't engage with. It's actually a map for someone that's sighted, and voiceover tries but doesn't always do a good job of describing what's happening. Like if I'm, for example, if I'm using an Uber, there's a map. In my other transportation company, there's a map. Or Google Maps, for example, there's a map, but it doesn't, I can't really engage with it too much. So when I saw that, I was like, that's not really for me. But the way you guys have this set up here, it's very accessible. In a way that I can engage with it, versus a physical map. It's layered. So I go to the building, then I go to the floor, and then I go to the
Mhm.
then I go to the artwork, and then I can look at it and whatever, versus it being a physical, picture map type thing. So I thought that was great.
However, despite their apparent ease in finding their way around the app, participants still identified accessibility barriers relating to the visual affordance of components throughout the app. So, for example, for low vision participants who had increased the default text size on their device, or participants who had a smaller device display, it was not always obvious that there was more content below the fold on certain screens. So something that Duanami mentioned earlier, some low vision participants struggle with the visual affordance of carousels throughout the app. Some participants didn't notice the pagination dots below the carousel. So they didn't know that content could be scrolled. Others noticed the dots, but didn't know which section of the screen they pertained to. One participant assumed the dots were a decorative flourish or like horizontal divider. So our recommendation in both cases was to make the presence of off-screen content, whether that's content below the fold or that's part of a carousel, more visually salient to sighted and low vision users. Participants praised the labeling of components throughout the app. One participant with a hearing impairment found the content logically structured with clear descriptions and enticing pictures. And they commented that the mixed format presentation was easier to read. Two screen reader users were particularly impressed with the presence and quality of text alternatives. But despite the apparent appreciation for the content, inefficient and ambiguous labeling of certain components caused accessibility barriers. So, for example, certain exhibits have associated audio clips that can be played. The play button's accessible name, it's announced to a screen reader user, is, in this example, Jim Eiserman sculptural screen, 58 seconds play audio, which is particularly long, and it front loads a lot of information about the audio clip. As a result, it's easy for screen reader users to miss that it's a play button. So our recommendation here was to front load the button's accessible name with play audio, followed by the name of the audio clip and then its duration. In another example, participants were unsure what the all guides button would do, which is on the right screenshot on the slide. The purpose of this button is to exit the current guide so that users can explore different guides in the app. But some participants thought it would take them to other parts of the current guide, and others just couldn't find a way to exit the guide. So to avoid any ambiguity over its purpose, our recommendation was to rename it Exit Guide, or words to that effect. And although this seems like a fairly trivial issue, it was one of those things that really underscores the value of user testing. And this picks up on Wanami's point earlier that the proof of the pudding is in the eating. Technically, everything was fine with this component. There were no apparent accessibility issues from a conformance compliance perspective. but it caused a surprising amount of friction, which none of the team had anticipated. The Bloomberg Connects app worked well across a range of assistive technologies. Screen reader users found the app easy to navigate. Low vision participants were able to zoom in easily on text and images. And the app, for the most part, worked well with voice control and with Braille. And we have a brief clip of various assistive technology users talking about the app.
Call mention, American sculpture,
Okay,
duration 9 characters. Actions, screen rep headings, containers, headings, related, heading,
Okay, related.
related, heading. The library of Euclid domain early, button. The library of Euclid domain early. Back, button.
There you go. I think that, once this is one of the situations where once you really get to understand the layout, because it does make a lot of sense. Once you get to understand the semantics of it, you can really navigate quickly and easily.
So I made it bigger just to read the text more easily. Oh, I can zoom in the photo. That's pretty nice. Very cool.
And how is this working with the Braille? Is that coming through? From the audio
Absolutely,
clip?
yes.
Yeah.
It's flawless thus far. Other than the things I pointed out earlier, this is extremely good with the Braille. And usually you're going to find that it is, because if it, most of the time, if it speaks well, it's going to Braille well.
But while the assistive technology experience was positive, some issues related to a lack of consistency between Bloomberg Connects and other native mobile apps. So, for example, the number pad on the lookup screen on the app looks very similar to the number pad interface on the phone app or the lock screen. So as a result, many participants drew on their experience of other native number pad interfaces. However, the Bloomberg Connects number pad operates in a different way, which caused some confusion. The way in which digits are entered using a screen reader is different, which participants struggle with. There was also no confirmation that a digit had been entered or deleted, and no easy way of checking what had been entered so far. So our recommendation here was simply to make the number pad more consistent with other native number pad interfaces by adopting similar features and positioning. So that's a brief overview of some of the accessibility barriers that we found. It should make it clear, though, that none of the reported accessibility barriers were showstoppers. So that is, the issues that participants encountered didn't prevent them from completing any of the tasks. Also, I should stress that the vast majority of issues didn't represent compliance fails. They were mainly just additional things that could be done to improve the user experience for people with disabilities and ultimately everyone. Now, we learned a lot from this process. Conducting user testing during a pandemic proved challenging. The most disappointing issue was not being able to conduct the testing in a real life location. However, we feel this was mitigated to some extent by the creation of this very plausible fictional alternative. The main technical hitch we encountered was in being able to record the participant's phone remotely using a platform such as Zoom. It's easy enough to record the screen and even the phone audio, but not the screen reader output. So for some reason, neither iOS nor Android channel the screen reader in the same way as regular phone audio. And we experimented with multiple configurations, but no success. And we also needed to make sure that the technical setup, because it was remote, wasn't too much of an ask for the participant. So the fallback was to asked participants to enable the caption panel in their settings, which displays a caption of whatever the screen reader is announcing at the bottom of the screen. You might have seen it in those videos just now. Not ideal, but at least we would have a visual representation of what was announced, even if at times we couldn't hear it. And there were also other unexpected issues. One participant successfully shared their screen and their audio, but we couldn't see anything but a black screen. So we had to abandon the testing session. It was only by chance that we discovered what was causing it. So the participant happened to be talking to a sighted friend on a bus and showed her friend something on her phone, but her friend said she couldn't see anything. And it turned out that the participant had the screen curtain enabled, which blanks the screen when using a screen reader to prevent people from sneakily viewing what a person's doing on their phone if they're in public, say. And screen curtain was also transmitted via Zoom, which is why we've been unable to see anything either. So these issues aside, with a few tweaks and adjustments, remote usability testing of apps with assistive technology users is a workable, effective, and efficient solution. As for what we learned about the app, participants were overwhelmingly positive about Bloomberg Connects and felt it could enrich the user experience for people with disabilities. Many participants asked whether Bloomberg Connects was available for them to use and were delighted to discover that their favorite museum or gallery was included in the app guides. The primary perceived benefit of the app was the agency and independence it would afford people with disabilities, meaning that they no longer have to rely on other people when visiting cultural institutions. Bloomberg Connects also has the potential to restore disabled people's interest and engagement with cultural institutions. And this was captured quite poignantly in this clip from one participant.
Yeah, and that's really the main reason why I haven't been going to art museums any longer, because there's no one there to describe anything to me. Or if I take a friend and they're like, well, this is a picture of a bird, you know. Yeah, okay, I don't know what to do with that. So yeah, it's there's not really a lot of help, and so I just don't go to museums anymore. So I've let all of that stuff go. But something like this would be, you know, I still would need someone to guide me through so I don't run into the artwork and damage stuff, because I'm totally blind. But at least this app would help me to understand what I'm looking at behind the glass.
So as we concluded in the report, Bloomberg Connects has great potential to provide the means for people with disabilities to engage or perhaps re-engage with cultural institutions and allow them to experience exhibits in a way that they might not have thought possible anymore. And now I'll hand back to Wanami to discuss the next steps.
Thanks, David. We can go to the next slide, please. So even though there were no showstoppers found in testing, we are committed to addressing all of the issues that we uncovered in our usability testing in order of impact and complexity. And as we continue to design and add new features to the app, we need to make sure that those features are accessible and meeting all of the WCAG standards and usable. And because it's software and sometimes introducing new things has the ability to break existing things, we are actively looking at ways to integrate accessibility testing into our end-to-end feature testing and QA. And we're always looking for opportunities to engage with users with disabilities, as well as our cultural partners, to do more research. And hopefully the next time we do research, it will be able to be in situ at an actual museum. So you can find us You can download the Bloomberg Connects app by scanning the QR code on the screen, the right side of the screen, or you can also search Bloomberg Connects in the App Store or on Google Play. And we encourage everyone to engage with us on our various social media platforms. You can find us on Facebook at Bloomberg Connects, capital B, capital C. You can find us on X, formerly known as Twitter, at BBG Connects, all lowercase. We're on Instagram at Bloomberg Connects, all lowercase, one word. And you can also learn more about the platform and Bloomberg philanthropies at bloombergconnects.org. And it goes without saying, we hope that you have the opportunity to experience the app on site at one of our hundreds of amazing partnering organizations. And if you do, please don't hesitate to let us know about your experience.
And TPGi offer a range of UX services, including design reviews, user research, and usability testing, and more. And you can find us on Facebook at TPG Interactive. You can also find us on X at TPG Interactive. I don't think we're on Instagram. TPGi is also on LinkedIn, and you can learn more at tpgi.com. And with that, I'd just like to say thank you for listening, and we hope that's given you an insight into the design and development and evaluation of an accessible mobile app. So we've got time for any questions or comments you might have, but also feel free to get in touch with us afterwards, or if you're viewing this at a later date.
Awesome, thank you both. Yeah, I do see some questions in the chat, so I'm gonna hop over to those real quick. So to start out, Jock was asking, does this app also exist as a web page or a website?
So this may not always be the case, but at this point in time, the only way to access the content is to download it from the App Store or Google Play. We have been evaluating the pros and cons of kind of having a mobile web version, but right now the native versions are the only ones that are out there.
Okay. Jock with another question. What font did you choose, and did you conduct research on the font?
We have a proprietary Bloomberg font that we use for the platform. And as far as I know, we didn't conduct any specific research, but I do know that it's like a very clean sans serif font that was one of the reasons it was selected was because it scales well. But no dedicated research on the font, as far as I know.
Okay. I see one more, but feel free to send any more questions you have in the chat. We still have some time to answer them. Regarding the written content, did you select or set or establish a reading or grade level? Some people also have cognitive disabilities at varying levels, including temporary cognitive disability.
That's a very good point. We have primarily left the level of the content up to the cultural partners, who often have their own set of standards and guidelines and identity that feeds into the content, but that is actually something really salient to consider, and I'll definitely be raising that with the team.
Awesome. I guess from my perspective, obviously a great presentation. Thank you both. Was there anything that either of you feel like you didn't get a chance to talk about regarding this that maybe didn't get into your presentation that you want to take a couple minutes to discuss, or did you feel like you covered everything?
I think it's, yeah, pretty well covered there. I mean, yeah, there's always bits and pieces we could expand on, but yeah, I think that's given the story of the development of this app. I
guess the only thing I would mention is that one of the additional challenges that we encounter is that the landscape is just changing so rapidly. So, for example, right after this, I'm going to join Apple's presentation. They're rolling out a new device today, I think the 15. So, you know, whenever this happens, we're always sort of keen to see what, if any, new accessibility features they're incorporating, but also what new patterns they might be introducing that are then going to become trends that we need to become aware of or work around. So it's a complex problem with a lot of moving parts.
Cool. Awesome. So I'm not seeing any more questions. So I think with that, we can probably wrap up. Thank you both for a wonderful presentation, and thank you everyone for attending. We will be sending out the recording this week. So if you had to jump off early or if anyone couldn't make it, you'll absolutely get the recording. But with that, thank you all very much and have an awesome rest of your day.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you
Yeah.
very much.
Bye.